Jews were sitting on one of the few park benches permitted to Jews in Germany in the 1930s. One was reading the Berliner Gemeindeblatt, a Jewish newspaper. The other was reading the intensely anti-Semitic Nazi publication Der Stürmer. "Why on earth are you reading that thing?" the Gemeindenblatt reader asked his friend. He replied, "When I read a Jewish publication, I hear of our problems and our terrible fate. When I read Der Stürmer, I read how we control the banks, world media, international governments, and how powerful we are. I much prefer that." We are very fortunate and blessed to live in the generation in which we do. Since the end of the Second World War, it seems as if here in America we've kind of been on a vacation from usual Jewish history. We may be among the most blessed of all generations of Jews who have ever lived. For many of us, it has truly seemed as if anti-Semitism was a thing of the past. Whatever anti-Jewish acts or words we might have experienced appeared to be the last vestiges of something that was disappearing. Anti-Semitism seems so thoroughly marginalized, sometimes whispered behind closed doors, no longer publicly acceptable. As we are daily learning, my friends, the honeymoon from usual Jewish history is over. The Anti-Defamation League reports that the United States Jewish community experienced near historic levels of anti-Semitism in 2018, including a doubling of anti-Semitic assaults and the single deadliest attack against the Jewish community in American history. The ADL's annual audit recorded a total of 1,879 attacks against Jews and Jewish institutions across the country in 2018. Anti-Semitism is a very hard thing to define. It comes in so many contradictory shapes and forms. It defies logic. It morphs and it recreates itself, and all these different manifestations as to preclude any one clear and coherent definition. I'll give you a sense of that incoherence with an old Soviet-era joke that Professor Deborah Lipstadt used in her recent book, Anti-Semitism. The USSR suffered chronic shortages of consumer goods. Early one morning, a rumor circulated in Moscow that a store was going to receive a shipment of shoes. A line formed immediately outside the store and continued to grow exponentially. After people had been waiting for an hour or so, the manager came out and announced, "We will not receive enough shoes to accommodate everyone. Jews, leave the line and go home." And they did. A few hours later, he came out again, and he said, "We'll not be receiving enough shoes as to accommodate everyone. If you're not a veteran of the Soviet army, go home." And they did. A few hours later, he emerged again and said, "We will not receive enough shoes to accommodate everyone. All those who are not members of the Communist Party, go home." And they did. As dusk was falling, he emerged one final time and said, "We will not be receiving any shoes today. Everyone go home." Deeply disappointed, two exhausted and shivering loyal Communist Party members, both veterans of the Second World War, walked away from the store, and as they did, one turned to the other and said bitterly, "Those Jews, they have all the luck." And there's a very telling truth about anti-Semitism in that joke, a delusional and absurd incoherence that nonetheless sounds perfectly clear and rational to the anti-Semite. That Jews have all the luck because they were the first to be kicked off the line. I once heard it said that anti-Semitism is not a Jewish illness, it's a Gentile illness. We don't cause it, we didn't create it, it doesn't live inside of us, but we are the ones who suffer its consequences. As Lipstadt noted, It's important to understand that anti-Semitism, as is the case with any prejudice, exists independently of any action by Jews. Sometimes an accusation against a particular Jew or even a group of Jews may be correct. There are some Jews who are obsessed with money or who mistreat their employees. But the same can be said about individual non-Jews. Saying that, of course, X is obsessed with money. He's a Jew, isn't he? That's anti-Semitic. Anti-Semitism is not the hatred of people who happen to be Jewish, but the hatred of people because they are Jewish. The bizarre contradictions of anti-Semitism can be highlighted in the things that we are blamed for sometimes. Leading up to and during the Holocaust, one of the major accusations against Jews in Western Europe was that we were so darn assimilated. We looked like everyone else. We dressed like everyone else. We acted like everyone else. We were successful in all areas of life. In other words, we were so threatening and guilty because after many centuries, we blended. We became the scary fifth column, leading right into the heart of the German people. How dare we? Yet in Eastern Europe, according to many of the same anti-Semites, this was the accusation. Look at those Jews. They're so different from us. They dress differently. They speak their own secret language. They won't eat with us. They keep themselves so separate. They're different. They're scary. Damned we do and damned if we don't. Damned because we fit in so well. Damned because we wanted to be separate. You know, the Jews, they're responsible for communism. You know, the Jews, they're responsible for capitalism. We just can't win. One can ask, when did anti-Semitism start? Where does it all come from? And the theories abound. Some say it's several centuries older than Christianity. Others say it started at the beginning of Christianity, that Christians became the new Israel. God was said to have ended the covenant with the Jews and formed a new covenant with Christians. Therefore, we Jews were supposed to either become Christian or disappear from history, one way or the other. We were supposed to be gone. And the fact that we were still around and claiming that we still had our covenant with God had to be an inconvenient truth, to say the least. I share these thoughts not to unnecessarily alarm or to frighten, but to help us all to prepare so that we can be better and larger and stronger than whatever anti-Semitism we may encounter. And even though it's very hard to define and absurd in its logic and often incoherent, we do know it when it's there. Some of you may remember when United States Supreme Court Justice Potter Stewart needed, I think in the early 1960s, needed to describe the threshold for obscenity for an important case. And though he himself could not define obscenity, he said, "But I know it when I see it." So it may be difficult to say exactly where it came from or predict how it will next manifest itself. But when it comes to anti-Semitism, we know it when we see it. There's another thing about anti-Semitism that's clear and consistent. So many scholars and historians seem to agree that in the family of nations, we Jews are the canary in the coal mine. A canary in a coal mine is an advanced warning system. The metaphor originates from a time not too many decades ago when miners used to literally carry caged canaries down into the mines. The canary would die before the level of methane or carbon monoxide in the mine would get too high, would be dangerous to the canary before the other humans. We are an early warning system when a society is in trouble. At a White House interfaith roundtable, this wise fellow, Ira Foreman, who was Obama's special envoy to monitor combat anti-Semitism, he said, "Throughout history and throughout the world, if Jews are under attack, other victims aren't far behind. If others are under attack, then Jews aren't far behind." David Harris of the American Jewish Community recently advised that we Jews need not be now level-headed, but that we learn to be swivel-headed. Because one of the tough realities of today's anti-Semitism is that it doesn't just come at us from the right, it also comes at us from the left. And most of us are used to looking over only one shoulder to see where it's coming from. We're now advised for our own good to be swivel-headed, to look right and to look left. The right's anti-Semitism tends to be more violent, while that of the left is more institutional. Moreover, social media spreads the ideas so very quickly that creates, as Professor Lipstadt says, a perfect storm from all different directions. In her book, How to Fight Anti-Semitism, Barry Weiss of the New York Times highlights a broad timeline of white nationalism in the United States. She writes of Leo Frank, a Jewish factory manager in Atlanta who in the early 20th century was convicted of the murder of a 13-year-old worker named Mary Fagan. In a series of trials that more closely resembled medieval blood libel than legal proceedings, Frank was sentenced to death. But after the governor of Georgia commuted his sentence to life in prison, a gang of around 25 men calling themselves the Knights of Mary Fagan took Frank from prison. And on the morning of August 17th, 1915, they lynched him. More than half of the 3,000 Jews living in Georgia at that time then left the state. Weiss tells us of Henry Ford, who was also a virulent anti-Semite, who paid for hundreds of thousands of copies of the Protocols of the Elders of Zion to be distributed across the country, including in schools. His newspaper, the Dearborn Independent, was a primary source of anti-Semitic conspiracy theories that blamed Jews for, among other things, engineering World War I for profit. The Jew was the enemy of world peace, Henry Ford taught. In the 1930s, followers of Adolf Hitler paraded down the streets of American cities and towns with swastika armbands and held mass rallies in places like Madison Square Garden, while Father Coughlin railed against the Jews' conspiracy to bring communism to America through their control of Franklin Roosevelt and to plunge the world into another war. In 1938, Charles Lindbergh was presented with a Nazi medal by Hermann Göring in Berlin. 3 years later, Lindbergh said in a speech in Des Moines, Iowa, he asked, "Who's pushing us to go to war? The British, the Jews, and the Roosevelt administration." And though such loud and public displays of white supremacy and anti-Semitism were out of favor in the decades after World War II, during our vacation from usual Jewish history, they never disappeared. They were apparently marginalized, went into hiding, the groups became smaller. But now we see it again today. The Jews will not replace us. Remember listening to that chant and wondering what they were saying for all the country to hear? It kind of sounded like they were saying, the Jews will not replace us. But I remember my autocorrect in my mind saying, well, that doesn't make any sense. I figured they're saying, you will not replace us. What did Jews have to do with those people in Charlottesville? But no, it wasn't just an expression of anger at immigration policies or the removal of Confederate statuary. It was indeed an expression of that anti-Semitic medieval Jewish conspiracy. The Jews are controlling everything. And the Jews are manipulating the United States government to get rid of these nice, pure white boys and to replace them with people of color. Because apparently we Jews have the power to do that. And so, they won't let us Jews replace them. Not brown shirts that night, but nice polo shirts and khakis. Not carrying threatening weapons in that march, but tiki torches as if they were on their way to some Gilligan's Island reunion. A nice clean-cut veneer, but the message in the irrational, hate-filled conspiracy mongering was straight from the Middle Ages. The threat from the right. But as we're learning, we have to be swivel-headed. We can't confine our vigilance to only looking over our right shoulders. Weiss warns, American Jews tend to be much more attuned to anti-Semitism when it comes from the political right. But it's also because American Jews have a deep affinity with the political left, and for sound reasons. It's a place where progressive ideas and Jewish values have been so much in sync for a very long time. But she's warning us to be swivel-headed as well, and to take a look over the left shoulder as well. It's on the left that Jewish leaders of the Women's March were subjected to ugly attacks and exclusion by the movement's other leaders. It's on the left that Manny's, a popular progressive cafe and event space in San Francisco, is being regularly protested. It's because its owner, a gay progressive Mizrahi Jew, is, according to the protesters, a Zionist and a gentrifier. It's there on the left that Jewish lesbians holding rainbow flags with Jewish stars were kicked out of the Dyke March in Chicago in 2017. And why 2 years later the Dyke March in Washington officially banned flags with Jewish stars under the guise of banning nationalist symbols. One journalist pointed out the irony that the organizers were fine with Palestinian flags, given that gayness is deeply taboo in Palestinian society and can get you killed. BDS may not have succeeded in passing on many campuses, but it very much succeeded in shaping the worldview of progressives, more and more of whom have come to believe that Israel is on the wrong side of history, that to identify as a Zionist is to identify as a racist, and that most breathtakingly of all, the Jewish state itself is a white supremacist project. It's here on the right and on the left and in our backyards, in our media, in our government. So what are we to do? I want to look briefly at two case studies, both from the past few weeks, both on college campuses. Yet one case is a miserable example of institutionalized anti-Semitism where no action was taken, no authorities were involved, no clarion call to the larger community to rise and react and condemn. And the other, a campus which reacted beautifully with unity, with clarity, and with strength. The first is from an op-ed piece written by student Lila Abelman, entitled "Anti-Semitism is Alive and Well at Hofstra," from the Hofstra Chronicle. She wrote, "Before coming to college, I heard stories of Jewish students being harassed on campus. What I discovered was that anti-Semitism is alive and more insidious than I had expected. After telling a professor that I would need to miss a class for the Jewish high holidays, I was told that I needed to reevaluate my religious beliefs. Later, a student compared the Jewish tradition of marrying within the religion to Nazi eugenics. When I approached the professor after the class to tell her how those comments were so inaccurate and how they made me feel, I was essentially told, 'Don't be so sensitive.' And then just 3 days after the Tree of Life synagogue shooting in Pittsburgh, another professor asked the class to discuss whether the shooter was truly evil. Many students expressed the belief that the shooter who murdered 11 innocent Jewish people could not be considered evil, as he did what he believed to be right. On another occasion, a classmate told me it was no longer important to learn about the Holocaust, since everybody knows about it already. I disagreed, citing a statistic stating that over a third of the people in major European cities don't know about Auschwitz. She replied, 'Of course Europeans wouldn't know about that. The Holocaust is American history.' These are a few, she wrote, of the significant and jarring incidents which happened to me in my freshman year of college. I'm sick and tired of being ignored by the administration and told by professors and students alike that anti-Semitism isn't real, it's not a real problem, or that it's not as bad as other forms of racism and bigotry plaguing the nation. We as a community must confront this issue now, she wrote, now to curb the rise of anti-Semitism before it's too late. The second college incident. This was sent to me by a father in our congregation whose daughter goes to Tufts University. And the following is a letter written by the university's president. September 17th, 2019. Dear members of the Tufts community, it is with great disappointment that I inform you of an incident of anti-Semitism at our university. Yesterday we learned that a Jewish student returning home to his residence hall on the Medford-Somerville campus Sunday night found a swastika affixed to his door. I condemn this cowardly act of hatred and ignorance. It is a direct attack on our Jewish community, an affront to our values as an institution. The Tufts University Police Department and the Office of Equal Opportunity are both investigating. And any member of our community who is found to be responsible will face disciplinary sanctions consistent with our university policies against discrimination, bias, and hate. I encourage those of you who are able to join us this afternoon to learn and to recommit ourselves to fighting the forces of hatred that seek to diminish our friends and fellow community members. In these times of division and disunity, we must remain ever vigilant in our efforts to ensure that Tufts remains an open, tolerant, and welcoming place for all. Sincerely, Tony Monaco. His words provide a virtual blueprint for what an institution should do in reaction to an act of hatred against any member of its community. The school's response was swift. The message was clear, labeling the act as cowardly and as ignorant. Tufts immediately involved law enforcement. They stated consequences to the perpetrator in no uncertain terms. They gathered all interested members of the community to learn and counsel and process together. And so very important, the clear message that an attack on one of us is an attack on all of us. The closing statement declaring that we must remain ever vigilant in our efforts to ensure that Tufts remain an open, tolerant, and welcoming home for all. In recent days, there was a similar incident when someone marked one of the bathroom stalls at Scarsdale High School with a swastika. And the reaction of the principal and the school's administration and parents was similarly thorough and clear and followed a very similar blueprint. I'm going to close with words that were found and passed around at a board meeting recently here at Kol Ami. Words that were written by U.S. Attorney Justin Herdman concerning a recent case involving a man who threatened a Jewish community center. These are from August 29th. He said, I want to start by thanking the community. This case is the result of a concerned citizen who took the time to point out Mr. Reardon's social media activity to the new Middletown police officer. This case is just one of several over the past weeks that are the product of our friends and neighbors seeing something and then saying something. Now let me speak generally to those who are advocates for white supremacy or white nationalism. I'm talking directly to you. The Constitution protects your right to speak, your right to think, and your right to believe. If you want to waste the blessing of liberty by going down a path of hatred and failed ideologies, that's your choice. Democracy allows you to test these ideas in the public forum. If you want to submit your beliefs to the American people and get their reaction, please be my guest. Keep this in mind, though. Thousands and thousands of young Americans already voted with their lives to ensure that the same message of intolerance, death, and destruction will not prevail. You can count their ballots by visiting any American cemetery in North Africa, Italy, France, or Belgium, and tallying the white headstones. Go ahead and make your case for Nazism, a white nation, and racial superiority. The Constitution gives you a choice, but it doesn't guarantee you a receptive audience. What you don't have, though, is the right to take your frustration at failure in the political arena by resorting to violence. You don't have the right to threaten the lives and well-being of our neighbors. They have an absolute God-given and inalienable right to live peacefully, to worship as they please, to be free from fear that they might become a target simply because of the color of their skin, the country of their birth, or the form of their prayer. Threatening to kill Jewish people, gunning down innocent Latinos on a weekend shopping trip, planning and plotting to perpetrate murders in the name of nonsense racial theory, sitting to pray with God-fearing people who you then choose to execute moments later, those actions don't make you soldiers. They make you criminals. Law enforcement doesn't go to war with cowards who break the law. We arrest them and send them to prison. And arm in arm with the public, when your hatred leads you to break the law, We will do everything we can to be there to stop you. The vacation from normal Jewish history may be ending. Again, I share these thoughts not to unnecessarily alarm or frighten, rather that we may be prepared, so that we will be better and larger and stronger than any challenge that hatred may lay